Look, I've been teaching survival skills at the Galactic Survival Academy for 37 standard cycles, and let me tell you something. I've seen every species in this sector try to prove they're the toughest, smartest, or most resourceful beings in the galaxy. Most of them are wrong. My name is Crix, and I'm what you'd call a professional pessimist. 4 arms, 6 eyes, and absolutely zero patience for overconfident cadets who think survival is some kind of game. I teach advanced wilderness survival on Zirion 7, a charming little death trap of a planet where the weather changes every 6 hours and the local fauna considers everything edible. This particular semester, I had the usual suspects in my class. There was Vex, a Krulorian whose species literally evolved in volcanic caves, built like a walking boulder with natural heat resistance, and the ability to digest rocks if necessary. Krulorians have a 92% pass rate in my course, mostly because they can just wait out any disaster by eating the landscape. Then we had Zara, a Binthian with that species' famous analytical mind and photographic memory. Binthians can calculate optimal resource allocation in their sleep and have been known to survive entire planetary winters by pure mathematical efficiency. They're annoying that way. Throck represented the Mandorian contingent, and frankly I wasn't worried about him. Mandorians are basically living tanks with built-in environmental suits and enough redundant organs to survive a direct hit from a plasma cannon. The only way Throck would fail my class is if he got bored and wandered off to find something more challenging, like juggling neutron stars. And then there was the human. Jake Murphy, exchange student from some backwater planet called Earth. According to his file, humans are a relatively new species on the galactic scene. No natural armor, no environmental adaptations, average intelligence, standard 2-armed configuration. Their home planet is apparently so mild and non-threatening that they've never developed any significant survival traits. They're basically the galactic equivalent of houseplants. Jake looked exactly like what you'd expect from his species description. Medium height, soft skin that looked like it had never seen real hardship, and this bizarre facial expression that humans call a smile, which, according to the cultural briefing, indicates either friendliness or predatory intent. With humans, apparently you can never tell which. The survival test is simple in concept, brutal in execution. 48 hours in Zirion 7's wilderness with minimal supplies. Each student gets 1 water purification tablet, 1 emergency ration pack, and 1 basic weather tarp. That's it. They need to find or build shelter, locate additional food and water, and survive whatever Zirion 7 decides to throw at them. The pass rate hovers around 60%, and that's with species who evolve specifically for this kind of challenge. I've seen Krulorians give up when the sulfur storms hit. I've watched Binthians have complete mental breakdowns when their calculations don't account for Zirion 7's random weather patterns. So when I looked at Jake Murphy, sitting there with that weird human smile, I'll admit I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pity. This soft little creature from his garden paradise planet was about to experience real hardship for probably the first time in his short existence. I almost felt bad about it. Almost. "All right, cadets," I announced, using all 4 arms to gesture at the transport ships. "Time to see what you're really made of. Try not to die on my watch. It creates paperwork." Jake raised his hand, and I suppressed a sigh. Here it comes, I thought. The panic, the excuses, the desperate plea for extra supplies. "Yes, Murphy?" "Quick question, Professor. Are we allowed to use anything we find out there, or are there restrictions on resource gathering?" I blinked all 6 eyes. That was actually a decent question. Most students were usually too terrified to think about regulations. Standard protocols apply. No damaging protected flora, no hunting endangered species, no strip meaning. Use common sense. "Got it, thanks." He gave me that smile again and settled back into his seat. Weird kid. At least he'd go out thinking ahead. The drop zone was everything Zirion 7 had to offer in terms of hospitality, which is to say it looked like the universe's idea of a practical joke. Rocky terrain scattered with thorny vegetation, a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain acid or just regular old toxic precipitation, and temperatures that swung between moderately uncomfortable and why did I choose this profession. I watched through the transport's viewports as my students got their first real look at what they'd signed up for. Vex just grunted and cracked his knuckles, which sounded like grinding stone. Throck was already running diagnostics on his environmental systems. Zara had pulled out some kind of analysis device and was taking readings of everything within a 50-meter radius. And Jake? Jake was looking around like he was planning a vacation. "Remember," I called out as the transport doors hissed open, You have 48 hours. Your emergency beacons will activate automatically if your vital signs reach critical levels, but try not to rely on that. Rescue operations are expensive, and I get docked pay for every student we have to scrape off the rocks. The standard supply drop was exactly what I'd promised. 1 water purification tablet that would clean about 10 liters if you were lucky. 1 emergency ration pack with enough calories to keep you conscious for maybe 30 hours. And 1 basic weather tarp that would keep the rain off your head as long as the wind didn't pick up, which it always did. Vex immediately started doing what Krulorians do best, which was finding the nearest rocky outcropping and beginning to excavate. His species had been digging regulation survival shelters for thousands of years, and he attacked the ground with methodical precision. Scrape, measure. By my calculations, he'd have a textbook defensive position ready in about 6 hours. Zara spread her tarp on the ground and began organizing her supplies with the kind of efficiency that made me want to assign her extra homework just on principle. She'd already identified 3 potential water sources, cataloged the local plant life, and was calculating optimal caloric expenditure for the next 2 days. Binthians turned survival into an exact science, which was both admirable and deeply annoying. Throck found a relatively flat area and just stood there, running internal scans of the environment. Mandorians didn't really need shelter in any meaningful sense, so his strategy was typically straightforward. Find a spot, plant himself there, and wait for everything else to give up first. It was boring but effective. And then there was Jake. Jake picked up his supplies, stuffed them into his pockets, and started walking. Not in any particular direction, mind you. Just walking, like he was taking a stroll through some kind of park. He was even humming something under his breath, some strange human melody that sounded almost cheerful. I activated my comm to the other instructors back at base. "Murphy's mobile, heading southeast toward the scrubland." "Panic response?" asked Professor Glix, who taught basic survival to the younger students. "Negative. He looks like he's enjoying himself." There was a pause. "That's concerning. Tell me about it." I watched Jake disappear into a grove of twisted trees, still humming that bizarre tune. The kid was either in complete denial about his situation, or he had some kind of plan that wasn't immediately obvious. Given that he was human, I was betting on denial. The first rule of Zirion 7 survival is simple. Find shelter, find water, find food. In that order. The second rule is even simpler. Don't deviate from the first rule unless you enjoy becoming a cautionary tale. Most species understood this instinctively. Their survival instincts had been honed by millions of years of evolution on dangerous worlds. Humans, according to their species profile, had evolved on a planet so safe and comfortable that their biggest natural predator was apparently something called a mosquito. I gave Jake about 4 hours before he'd be crying into his emergency beacon. The smart money was on him not lasting through the first night. 6 hours into the exercise, I was comfortably settled in my observation post with a hot cup of Klaxon brew and a full array of monitoring drones. This was always my favorite part of the job. Watching overconfident students realize that Zirion 7 doesn't care about their species' reputation or their personal accomplishments. Drone 1 was tracking Vex, who had excavated a perfectly regulation survival shelter that would have made his instructors proud. Deep enough to provide thermal insulation, wide enough for defensive positioning, with proper drainage channels and sight lines. Textbook Krulorian survival doctrine. He'd be fine, as long as he didn't get too creative. Drone 2 showed Zara constructing what could generously be called a shelter, though it looked more like a geometric theorem made of sticks and tarp. She'd calculated the optimal angles for wind resistance and water runoff, and her structure looked like it could survive a direct orbital bombardment. The Binthian approach. If you can't make it pretty, make it mathematically perfect. Duroc had found a nice flat rock and was standing on it like a statue. His internal systems were maintaining perfect environmental balance while he conserved energy. Occasionally, he'd move about 6 inches to track the sun's position. Mandorian survival strategy was basically professional loitering, but it worked. Then Jake had vanished. Not in a, "oh no, he fell off a cliff" way. In a, "where the hell did he go and why can't 3 different monitoring systems find him" way. His last known position was near a cluster of thornbush trees about 2 kilometers southeast of the drop zone, but when I'd sent the drone to check on him, there was nothing there but bent grass and what looked like deliberately arranged stones. "Professor Krix," my assistant Blort poked his head into the observation booth. "We're getting some weird readings from Sector 7. Define weird." "Well, there's smoke." I nearly dropped my Klaxon brew. Smoke? What kind of smoke? Forest fire? Chemical reaction? Student having a complete breakdown and burning their supplies? Unknown origin smoke, sir. It's coming from somewhere near Murphy's last known position. This was bad. Smoke meant fire, fire meant either success or catastrophe, and with humans, I was betting on catastrophe. The kid had probably tried to start a warming fire and set himself ablaze. I'd have to explain to his home planet why their exchange student had become a small pile of ash and regret. Redirect Drone 3 to investigate and prep a rescue team, just in case we need to collect whatever's left of him. The drone feed came online and I nearly choked on my drink. There was Jake, sitting next to what appeared to be a small but extremely functional campfire, doing something with a long stick and some kind of string. He'd somehow constructed a basic lean-to shelter that actually looked weather-resistant, and more importantly, he looked completely relaxed. Blort, run a systems check on Drone 3. All systems green, Professor. Then why does it look like the human has built actual furniture? Because he had. Next to his shelter was what could only be described as a primitive chair made from woven branches, and beside the fire was a flat stone that he was apparently using as a table. On the stone were several small objects that looked suspiciously like tools. I watched in fascination as Jake stood up and cast his stick and string contraption into a nearby stream. A fishing rod. The human had somehow constructed a fishing rod. Sir, Blort was staring at the screen over my shoulder. Is he supposed to be able to do that? According to his species file, humans have no notable survival adaptations. They're classified as environmental dependence, with a survival rating of minimal without technology. We watched as Jake pulled something silvery and writhing out of the water. A fish. He'd caught an actual fish with an improvised fishing rod made from materials he'd apparently found lying around Zirion 7's hostile wilderness. Maybe the file's wrong, Blort suggested hopefully. I pulled up the human species database on my secondary screen. Home planet, temperate, stable climate. Natural predators, negligible. Environmental hazards, minimal. Survival adaptations, none listed. The report was filed by a galactic survey team that had apparently spent all of 6 months cataloging human civilization. Either the file's wrong, I said slowly, watching Jake clean his fish with what looked like a knife made from sharpened stone, or we're dealing with a statistical anomaly. What kind of statistical anomaly? Jake had returned to his fire and was doing something that looked suspiciously like seasoning the fish, with local plants. Plants that, according to my botanical database, were technically edible, but that most species avoided because they tasted terrible. The kind that makes me question my career choices, I muttered. The other students were following standard survival protocols. Find shelter, secure water, ration food, wait for extraction. They were doing everything right according to thousands of years of established survival doctrine. Jake was apparently treating this like some kind of camping trip. As if to prove my point, the human stretched, patted his stomach in what appeared to be satisfaction, and began gathering more wood for his fire. Not in the frantic way of someone fighting hypothermia, but in the casual way of someone who planned to be comfortable for a while. Keep monitoring, I told Blurt, and pull the files on every human survival case we have on record. There's only 3, sir, and they're all listed as anomalous circumstances, with incomplete data. Of course they were. I was starting to get a very bad feeling about this whole situation. Day 2 began with what I like to call the reality check hour. This is when students who thought they had everything figured out discover that Zirion 7 has a sense of humor, and it's not funny. The morning brought one of our charming acid rain showers, the kind that can dissolve inadequate shelter materials and leave you with chemical burns if you're not careful. I settled in with my morning klaxon brew to watch my students deal with their first real environmental challenge. Vex was handling it exactly as expected. His rock shelter was holding up perfectly, and he was just sitting inside, waiting for the weather to pass. Boring, but effective. Krulorians don't panic, they just endure until the universe gets tired of trying to kill them. Zara's mathematical shelter was performing admirably. She'd calculated the exact pH levels of Zirion 7's precipitation and constructed her roof accordingly. The acid was rolling off her geometric masterpiece like water off a Binthian's back. She was probably taking notes on structural efficiency for her post-exercise report. Throck hadn't moved. The acid rain was hitting his environmental shields and just evaporating on contact. He looked like he was meditating, but knowing Mendorians, he was probably running internal diagnostics or composing poetry. Their species had weird hobbies. And then I checked on Jake. Lort, run a full diagnostic on all monitoring systems. Just do it. What I was seeing couldn't possibly be correct. According to Drone 3's feed, Jake had somehow constructed what appeared to be a legitimate log cabin. Not a lean-to, not a basic shelter, but an actual structure, with walls, a slanted roof, and what looked suspiciously like a chimney. Smoke was rising from said chimney in a steady, controlled stream. All diagnostics complete, Professor. Systems are functioning normally. I zoomed in for a closer look. The cabin was small but undeniably solid, built from logs that Jake had apparently cut and shaped using tools that shouldn't exist. The roof was covered with overlapping bark sheets that were channeling the acid rain away from the structure, with what looked like professionally engineered drainage. Blort, pull up yesterday's surveillance footage. I want to see how he built that thing. We spent the next hour reviewing drone footage, and what we found made absolutely no sense. Somewhere between losing visual contact and reacquiring it, Jake had apparently become a one-man construction crew. The footage showed him selecting specific trees, somehow felling them with what appeared to be a stone axe he'd crafted from local materials, then trimming and shaping the logs with tools that he seemed to manufacture as needed. His technique was efficient, purposeful, and completely beyond what his species files suggested was possible. Maybe he had hidden tools, Blort suggested weakly. Bureau was searched before deployment, standard protocol. Cybernetic enhancements? I checked Jake's medical scan. Completely organic, no implants, no modifications, no technological assistance of any kind. We watched as the human emerged from his cabin, apparently checking the weather. He was wearing what looked like a woven grass cloak that was keeping him completely dry. When the acid rain lessened, he walked to what I now realized was a sophisticated water collection system he'd constructed, using hollowed-out logs and carefully positioned leaves. "Sir?" Blort's voice was getting higher, which happened when he was nervous. "What's that area behind his cabin?" I adjusted the drone's position and felt my left eye start twitching, which is never a good sign. Behind Jake's shelter was a small but organized plot of land, where he had apparently planted seeds of some kind. The tiny green shoots were already sprouting in neat, deliberate rows. "He's gardening," I said, mostly to convince myself that I wasn't having some kind of psychotic break. "The human is gardening." "Where did he get seeds?" "I don't know, Blort. I don't know anything anymore." Jake finished checking his water collection system and disappeared back into his cabin. A few minutes later, more smoke began rising from the chimney, but this time it carried the distinct aroma of cooking food. I activated the emergency communication system. "This is Professor Crix. I need all available instructors to report to Observatory 1 immediately." Within 10 minutes, I had 5 other faculty members crowded around the monitoring station, all staring at Jake's impossible homestead. "How long has he been at this?" asked Professor Glix. 36 hours. And he built all of this with no tools. He made the tools, apparently from rocks and sticks and whatever else was lying around. Professor Thext, who taught advanced xenobiology, pulled up Jake's species file on her portable display. According to this, humans are barely above subsistence-level survivalists. Their home planet requires no significant adaptive traits. Well, either the file is catastrophically wrong or we're dealing with a human who didn't read his own species manual. Dr. Kvorch, our senior survival instructor, was studying the architectural details of Jake's cabin through the drone feed. "Those construction techniques are sophisticated. The joint work alone suggests advanced understanding of load distribution and material stress. Where would a species with no survival adaptations learn this?" "Maybe it's instinctual," suggested Professor Glix. I laughed, and it came out a little hysterical. "Instinctual! Look at this!" I switched the feed to show Jake's garden plot. He's practicing agriculture. In a survival situation, who does that? As if summoned by my question, Jake emerged from his cabin carrying what appeared to be a handmade fishing net. He walked to a section of the stream where he'd apparently constructed some kind of fish trap, checked his catch, and selected several specimens for what I could only assume was dinner. "He's not just surviving," Dr. Kvorch said quietly. "He's thriving." "This is beyond anything in our survival protocols," added Professor Tex. "He's essentially established a permanent settlement." I watched Jake return to his cabin and noticed for the first time that he'd carved something into a flat stone beside his door. Drone 3 wasn't close enough to read it, but it looked suspiciously like writing. "Blort, how much time is left in the exercise?" 12 hours, sir." "Send out additional drones. I want continuous monitoring of all students, but focus on Murphy, document everything, and pull every piece of data we have on human civilization." "All of it, sir?" "All of it. I have a feeling we've been seriously underestimating what these humans are capable of." As the other instructors filed out, muttering among themselves, I remained glued to the monitoring station. Jake had returned to his cabin, and warm yellow light was now glowing from what appeared to be windows he'd somehow constructed. The human wasn't just surviving Zerion 7, he was making it look easy, and that terrified me more than I cared to admit. By hour 45 of the exercise, I had convened what could only be described as an emergency faculty crisis meeting. 7 instructors, 2 department heads, and 1 very confused academy administrator were crowded around the monitoring station, watching Jake Murphy make a mockery of everything we thought we knew about survival training. Replay the last hour, Director Quinth commanded, her 3 heads all focused on different displays. Lord obliged, and we watched in collective silence as Jake emerged from his cabin carrying what appeared to be a woven basket filled with fresh vegetables. Vegetables that had somehow grown from seedling to harvest ready in less than 2 days. He walked to a section of his property where he'd apparently constructed a root cellar, complete with ventilation shafts and temperature control systems made from arranged stones and carefully positioned airflow channels that left the channels. That's impossible, muttered Professor Glix. Plant biology doesn't work that way. Maybe he brought seeds that were pre-treated, suggested Dr. Kvorch, grasping for any rational explanation. From where? I demanded. He was searched. His pockets contained exactly what we gave him, plus some local stones he'd picked up. No seeds, no tools, no hidden supplies. Director Kent's middle head was reading from a datapad. I've reviewed the human cultural files we have on record. There are references to something called agriculture and animal husbandry, but the descriptions suggest these are large-scale, technology-dependent operations requiring years of planning and implementation. On screen, Jake was now tending to what appeared to be a small but functional workshop area beside his cabin. He'd somehow constructed a primitive forge using local clay and stones, and was shaping what looked like metal implements from materials I couldn't identify. Where is he getting metal? Asked Professor Thex. Lort enhanced the image. It appears he's processing some kind of local ore. Drone geological scans show trace mineral deposits in the area, but they're buried at least 2 meters down. So he's mining now, I said, feeling my grip on reality continue to slip. The human is strip mining Zerion 7 with handmade tools. Not strip mining, Dr. Kvorch corrected, studying the footage. Selective extraction. Look at how precisely he's working. He's taking exactly what he needs without disturbing the surrounding ecosystem. That level of resource management suggests advanced understanding of environmental impact. Jake finished whatever he was making and held it up to examine it. It was clearly a knife, but not just any knife. The blade gleamed with the kind of edge that suggested professional metalworking techniques, and the handle was wrapped with what appeared to be expertly prepared leather. That's master-level craftsmanship, breathed Professor Thext. My species has been working metal for millennia, and I couldn't produce something that refined with primitive tools. Director Kent's rightmost head was frantically accessing the galactic database. I'm cross-referencing human civilization reports with our survival training protocols. According to the initial survey data, humans practice something called recreational outdoor activities, where they voluntarily subject themselves to survival conditions for entertainment purposes. Entertainment? Several voices said in unison. The reports mention activities called camping, hiking, hunting, and fishing. Apparently humans. What followed was the most educational and simultaneously demoralizing hour of my 37-cycle teaching career. Jake led us through his settlement with the enthusiasm of someone showing off a hobby project, casually explaining techniques that would have revolutionized our entire survival curriculum. The main cabin featured hand-carved furniture, a functional fireplace with a proper chimney and flue system, and windows made from thin scraped animal hide that somehow provided both light and weatherproofing. The key to the fireplace, Jake explained cheerfully, is getting the draft right. You want to angle the flue just so, and then you need a good damper system to control airflow. I used flat stones with some clay mortar I made from local deposits. Professor Thex was taking frantic notes. Where did you learn about flue dynamics and thermal engineering? Oh, that's just basic stuff. My dad and I built a cabin in our backyard when I was 8. He taught me about proper ventilation so we wouldn't die of smoke inhalation. Jake paused thoughtfully. Come to think of it, that's probably why they teach it to kids. Safety first and all that. We moved to his workshop, where Jake demonstrated his forge setup and showed us the various tools he'd manufactured. Knives, axes, farming implements, even what appeared to be precision measurement devices carved from local wood and calibrated using astronomical observations. This is a sextant, Dr. Kvorch said, picking up one of Jake's wooden instruments. You built a functional sextant. From scratch. Well, sort of. It's more like a simplified theodolite, really. I needed to establish true north for a proper garden orientation, and you can't do that without decent surveying equipment. You oriented your garden to true north? I asked. Of course. Optimal sun exposure for the growing season. Plus, it makes water management easier if you understand the local drainage patterns. Director Kent was examining Jake's irrigation system, which used a series of bamboo-like hollow reeds to channel water from his collection point to various parts of his garden, with what appeared to be precise flow control. This represents advanced hydraulic engineering principles. Not really, Jake said modestly. It's just gravity-fed water distribution. Romans figured this stuff out like 2,000 years ago, though I did have to modify the design a bit since I don't have access to proper concrete. The garden itself was a masterpiece of agricultural planning. Jake had somehow identified which local plants were edible, tested soil conditions, implemented companion planting strategies, and even established what appeared to be a composting system to maintain soil fertility. How did you know which plants were safe to eat? Asked Professor Glix. Standard edibility testing. You start with skin contact, then lip contact, then tongue contact, and work your way up. Takes about a day to test each plant properly if you're being careful. Plus, some of these are pretty obviously related to earth plants I recognize. You tested potentially toxic alien vegetation on yourself? Dr. Kvorch sounded horrified. Well, yeah, I mean, that's how you determine food safety in unknown environments. They teach that in like 6th grade outdoor education. Professor Text looked up from her notes. Jake, what age do humans typically learn these survival skills? Depends on where you grow up, I guess. Rural kids learn earlier, but most people pick up the basics sometime in elementary school. By high school, pretty much everyone knows how to handle basic wilderness survival. For a few days, at least. Everyone? Director Kent's 3 heads exchanged glances. Sure, it's just common sense stuff. How to find water, build shelter, identify food sources, basic first aid, navigation techniques, standard life skills. I was beginning to understand why the galactic survey of Earth had been so catastrophically incomplete. They'd apparently visited during some kind of normal, peaceful period and assumed that represented the full extent of human capability. They'd never realized that every human was essentially a trained survivalist just by virtue of their normal upbringing. Jake led us to his final surprise, a small but sophisticated workshop where he'd been crafting what appeared to be recreational items, musical instruments, games, even what looked like books made from processed plant fibers. I've got a lot of time in the evenings, he explained, so I've been working on some projects. Gets boring just sitting around, you know. You got bored, I said slowly. So you invented writing materials and started a literature program. Well, I didn't invent writing. I just made some paper and ink from local stuff so I could keep a journal, document what I've learned about the local ecosystem, record the garden growth patterns, that sort of thing. He handed me one of his handmade books. The paper was smooth and even, the ink was dark and clear, and the writing was detailed observations about Xerion 7's flora and fauna that would have impressed our xenobiology department. Jake, I said, feeling like I was about to ask a question that might break my brain, what would you consider a real survival challenge? His face lit up. Oh man, there are some amazing places back on Earth. There's this spot in Antarctica where my uncle went on an expedition. -60 temperatures, 100-mile-per-hour winds, no plant or animal life for hundreds of miles in any direction. You have to build everything from ice and snow, hunt seals through breathing holes, navigate by stars for months during polar night. And humans do this voluntarily. Well, not everyone, but yeah, there are people who specialize in extreme environment survival. Some of them spend years in places that make this look like a tropical resort. Director Kent was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. Jake, would you be interested in a teaching position? Here? At the academy? We appear to have some significant gaps in our survival curriculum. Jake looked around at his settlement, then back at us. That could be fun, though I should probably warn you, this is pretty basic stuff by human standards. If you really want to upgrade your program, you should talk to my little sister Emma, or maybe some of the guys from the Marine Corps Survival School. 2 sets of equipment. There are more of you, Professor Glix asked weakly. Oh sure, millions of people back on Earth who are way better at this stuff than I am. Emma's planning to spend next summer doing solo survival in the Amazon rainforest. Says the biodiversity makes it more interesting than temperate climates. I looked around at what Jake considered a casual camping trip and tried to imagine what his little sister might accomplish if turned loose on Xerion 7. The mental image was terrifying. We should probably wrap up the exercise, I said. The other students are probably wondering why they haven't been extracted yet. Oh right, the exercise. Jake checked what appeared to be a sundial he'd carved into a flat stone. How'd everyone else do? They survived. That's usually considered a passing grade. Cool. Hey, before you go, want to try some of that fish I caught? I've been smoking it over a hardwood fire, and I made this really nice seasoning blend from local herbs. As we flew back to the academy, I stared out at Jake's settlement shrinking below us. In 48 hours, using nothing but basic supplies and materials he'd found lying around, a human had established what could only be described as the foundations of a thriving civilization. Director, I said as we approached the landing pad, I think we need to seriously reconsider our understanding of human survival capabilities. Already in progress, Professor Crix. I've authorized a full cultural reassessment mission to Earth. We need to understand how a species we classified as environmentally dependent produces individuals capable of this level of resource management and environmental adaptation. And Jake's teaching position? Approved, though I'm not sure our current students are ready for what he might consider beginner-level survival training. As we landed, I could see Jake in the distance, apparently starting construction on what looked like a permanent bridge across the stream near his settlement. Even though the exercise was over, he seemed to be treating this as a long-term residence rather than a temporary camping trip. There is one more thing, I told Director Quenth as we disembarked. Jake mentioned something about winter camping being more challenging. What about it? Zirion 7 has a winter season. We both looked back toward Jake's settlement, where smoke was rising peacefully from his handmade chimney. Maybe we should consider extending the course to a full semester, Director Quenth suggested. I thought about Jake Murphy, casually building civilizations for entertainment, and his little sister who was apparently even more skilled, and the millions of other humans back on Earth who considered this kind of thing a hobby. Maybe we should consider early retirement, I replied. But despite everything, despite having my entire understanding of survival training turned upside down by a human who thought hostile alien planets were relaxing vacation spots, I had to admit one thing. It had been the most interesting class I'd ever taught. Even if I'd probably need therapy to recover from it.